The woman in the black dress walked into my father's funeral like she owned the place. Designer sunglasses, expensive jewelry, an air of entitlement that made my skin crawl. I'd never seen her before in my life. She sat in the front row, my family's row, and when I asked her to move, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "I have more right to be here than you do." I was the love of his life. 3 weeks later, she filed a claim for half his estate. She thought I was just a grieving daughter who'd roll over. She had no idea I was a corporate attorney who'd spent 10 years destroying people far more competent than her. What I did next didn't just protect my inheritance. It exposed a fraud so elaborate that she lost everything, including her freedom. If you believe fraudsters deserve to face the full force of the law, you need to subscribe right now. Hit that like button, because this is a story about someone who thought they could steal from a dead man's family and got absolutely demolished in court. Drop a comment and tell me, what is the most audacious scam you've ever witnessed? Let's dive into this, because what you are about to hear is a masterclass in due diligence, legal warfare, and cold, calculated justice. My father died on a Tuesday, heart attack, sudden. He was 68 years old, had just retired from his medical practice 6 months earlier. He'd been a cardiologist for 40 years. The irony of a heart specialist dying of a heart attack wasn't lost on anyone. He'd spent his entire career saving other people's hearts while his own quietly deteriorated. I got the call at 4 in the morning. My mother, they'd been divorced for 15 years, but remained friendly, her voice shaking on the other end of the line. "Sweetheart, I am so sorry. Your father had a heart attack. He didn't make it." The world tilted. My father and I had been close, talked every Sunday, had dinner together twice a month. He'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding 3 years ago, had been planning to visit me and my husband in Boston next month, and now he was just gone. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday. 4 days to plan a service, notify people, write an obituary, choose a casket. 4 days of moving through a fog of grief while handling logistics. My brother Marcus flew in from California. My mother helped with arrangements despite the divorce. My father's siblings, cousins, colleagues from the hospital, everyone rallying to say goodbye to a man who'd touched countless lives. The service was at Riverside Memorial Chapel. We'd chosen it because it was large enough to accommodate the crowd we expected. My father had been well loved in the medical community. The room filled quickly. Colleagues, former patients, friends from his golf club, neighbors. I was standing near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived when she walked in. Tall, maybe 5'9", 40s, though she'd clearly had work done, that specific kind of ageless that comes from good plastic surgery and expensive skincare. Black designer dress that probably cost more than my car payment. Chanel sunglasses even though we were indoors. Jewelry that caught the light, diamond earrings. A substantial necklace, rings on multiple fingers. She walked past me without a word and made her way to the front of the chapel, to the first row, the row reserved for immediate family. I watched confused as she sat down next to where my mother was supposed to sit, just settled in like she belonged there. My brother Marcus noticed too. "Who the hell is that?" "No idea." I approached her, trying to be polite despite my confusion. "Excuse me, I am sorry, but this row is reserved for family." She turned to look at me, removed her sunglasses slowly, deliberately. Her eyes were cold, ice blue, calculating. "I know. I don't think you understand. This is for immediate family only. If you were a friend of my father's, there are seats further back." "I understand perfectly." Her voice was smooth, practiced. "I am exactly where I should be." "I was your father's partner for the past 3 years." The word hung in the air. Partner. My father didn't have a partner, I said carefully. He was single. "Your father had me." She smiled, and it was one of the most unsettling expressions I'd ever seen. All teeth, no warmth. "We were together for 3 years, lived together for the last 18 months. I was with him when he died." That stopped me cold. "What?" "The heart attack happened at our home. I was the one who called 911. I was the one who rode in the ambulance." She leaned back in the pew, completely at ease. "So yes, I have more right to be in this row than anyone. I was the love of his life." My mother had approached during this exchange. She looked as confused as I felt. "I am sorry, who are you?" "Vanessa Hartley, and you must be the ex-wife." Not hostile exactly, just dismissive, like my mother was an inconvenient relic of my father's past. "I think there has been some misunderstanding," my mother said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Robert didn't have a partner. He would have told his children. Robert kept our relationship private because he knew his family wouldn't approve. I am younger. I am not from your social circle, and I am sure that would have been uncomfortable for everyone. But that doesn't make what we had any less real. I felt like I'd stepped into an alternate reality. My father, who called me every Sunday, who I had dinner with twice a month, who'd been planning to visit next month, that man had a live-in girlfriend for 18 months and never mentioned it. I don't believe you, I said flatly. Vanessa reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, started scrolling, then turned the screen toward me. Photos, my father and this woman, at restaurants, on what looked like a vacation beach setting, tropical. One of them in front of a house, his arm around her shoulders. My stomach dropped. That is our home, Vanessa said, pointing to the house photo. Well, it was Robert's home. Now it is mine, I suppose, along with everything else. What do you mean, everything else? Marcus had joined us now, his voice hard. I mean that Robert and I were building a life together. We shared everything, and when someone dies, their partner inherits. That is how it works. Not if there is a will, I said. I am a corporate attorney. Estate law isn't my specialty, but I know the basics. My father had a will. Everything was designated to go to me and Marcus. Wills can be changed. Vanessa's smile widened. And people's priorities shift when they fall in love. She stood up, smoothing her dress. I am going to sit here, in the front row, because I earned that right. If you have a problem with it, we can discuss it after the service. But today is about saying goodbye to the man I loved, so I'd appreciate it if you'd stop harassing me and let me grieve. She sat back down, put her sunglasses back on, crossed her legs elegantly, and stared straight ahead at my father's casket. I wanted to physically remove her, wanted to call security and have her thrown out. But we were at a funeral. People were watching, and causing a scene felt impossible. Let it go for now, my mother whispered. We'll deal with this after. So we did. We let her sit in the front row, let her dab at her eyes with a lace handkerchief during the eulogy, let her approach the casket during the viewing and place her hand on the wood, whispering something we couldn't hear. The whole time I was mentally cataloging everything about her, the way she moved, the way she interacted with people, or rather, didn't. She spoke to no one except us, didn't seem to know any of my father's friends or colleagues. When people offered condolences, she accepted them graciously but vaguely. After the service, at the reception at my mother's house, Vanessa didn't attend, just disappeared. That is when I started making calls. The first call I made was to my father's attorney, Howard Brennan. Howard had been my father's lawyer for 20 years, handled his divorce from my mother, drafted his will, managed his estate planning. Howard, it is Claire. I need to know about my father's will. Of course, Claire. I am so sorry for your loss. Robert was a good man. Thank you. Howard, at the funeral today, a woman showed up claiming to be Dad's partner. Said her name was Vanessa Hartley. Said they'd been together for 3 years. Do you know anything about this? There was a pause. I've never heard that name. Did Dad ever mention having a girlfriend, a partner, anyone he was serious about? Not to me. And Claire, he updated his will 8 months ago. You and Marcus are still the primary beneficiaries. There is no mention of any Vanessa Hartley. 8 months ago, if Vanessa was telling the truth about living with him for 18 months, he'd updated his will while living with her and still left everything to his children. Can you send me a copy of the will? I'll email it to you within the hour. But Claire, if this woman is claiming to be entitled to part of the estate, you need to be prepared for a legal challenge. Even if she is not in the will, she could file a claim. Let her try. I am an attorney, Howard. I know how to fight. The will arrived in my inbox 45 minutes later. I read through it carefully. Everything was straightforward. The estate was to be split 50-50 between Marcus and me. There was a small bequest to my mother for sentimental reasons and donations to several medical charities my father had supported. No mention of Vanessa Hartley anywhere. But Vanessa had said my father died at their home. If they'd been living together, if he'd been keeping this relationship secret, there might be complications I wasn't seeing yet. I called Marcus. We need to go to Dad's house. When? Now. My father's house was in Westchester, a 40-minute drive from my mother's place in Connecticut. It was a beautiful colonial he'd bought after the divorce, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, large yard. He'd lived there alone for 15 years. Or had he? Marcus and I drove there in silence. I still had a key. Dad had given both of us keys years ago in case of emergency. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked normal, well maintained. Dad's car was in the garage, a silver Lexus he'd bought 2 years ago. We let ourselves in through the front door. The house felt wrong immediately. Not wrong like someone had broken in, wrong like it wasn't my father's house anymore. The furniture was different, not all of it. The bones of the house were the same, but details had changed. New throw pillows on the couch, in colors my father would never have chosen: bright turquoise, coral pink, decorative items on shelves that weren't his style: abstract sculptures, modernist art pieces. In the kitchen, the coffee maker was different, the dish towels, small changes, but everywhere. Marcus, look at this. I was standing in the dining room, looking at a photograph in a silver frame on the sideboard. My father and Vanessa professional photo, clearly staged, both dressed formally, smiling at the camera. Next to it, another framed photo. Vanessa alone, posed like a catalog model. The photos of me and Marcus that used to sit on that sideboard were gone. We went upstairs. My father's bedroom, the master suite at the end of the hall, had been completely transformed. The bedding was different. The color scheme, there were women's clothes in the closet. Lots of them, designer labels, expensive pieces. The bathroom had 2 sinks, both clearly in use, his and hers toiletries. Her side had an elaborate skincare routine laid out, serums, creams, tools I didn't recognize. She was living here, Marcus said. She was actually living here. We searched the house methodically. In my father's home office, we found more evidence: joint bills, utilities in both names, credit card statements showing purchases for both of them. But here is what was strange. The relationship felt surface level. Yes, they'd lived together. Yes, there was evidence of a romantic relationship, but it felt staged, too perfect, too curated. In Dad's desk drawer, I found a folder labeled Important Documents. Inside, his will, the same one Howard had sent me, insurance policies, property deeds, investment statements. I photographed everything with my phone. The will showed my father's estate was substantial. Between his retirement savings, his investment portfolio, the house, and his life insurance, we were looking at approximately $3.8 million. A lot of money, enough to kill for. I immediately felt guilty for thinking that, but the thought wouldn't leave. This woman I'd never heard of showing up at the funeral, claiming to be his partner, living in his house, and my father dies suddenly of a heart attack. Marcus, we need to request an autopsy. He looked at me sharply. You think she killed him? I think we need to rule it out. Dad was healthy. He just had a physical 6 weeks ago. He told me everything looked good, and then he suddenly dies of a heart attack. With this woman we've never heard of conveniently present. Claire, that is a serious accusation. I am not accusing yet. I am investigating. There is a difference. We left the house, taking the folder of documents with us. That is probably technically theft, but it was my father's house and I was his executor. I was entitled to his records. Back at my hotel room that night, I'd checked into a hotel rather than staying with my mother. I needed space to think. I started doing what I do best, research. I Googled Vanessa Hartley, multiple results. But when I started digging, things got interesting. There was a Vanessa Hartley who'd been arrested 5 years ago in Florida for fraud. Credit card scam. Charges were dropped when she paid restitution. A Vanessa Hartley sued in civil court 3 years ago by an elderly man's children, claiming she'd manipulated their father into changing his will to benefit her. That case had been settled out of court. A Vanessa Hartley who'd been engaged to a wealthy businessman in Connecticut. The engagement ended abruptly, and he'd filed a restraining order. Details were sealed, but it was public record that the restraining order existed. Could be the same woman, could be different women with the same name, but it was enough to raise red flags. I needed to confirm if this was the same person. I pulled up the photo from my father's house, the one of Vanessa alone, ran it through reverse image search. Nothing useful came up directly, but I found her social media, Vanessa Hartley, based in New York. Private accounts, but her profile pictures matched. I could see a few public posts, all lifestyle content, her at expensive restaurants, designer purchases, luxury vacation spots. Going back through her Instagram posts that were public, I found something interesting. 2 years ago, she'd posted a photo with another older man. The caption, "Lucky to have found my best friend through the cest," but that post had been deleted. I only found it through cached Google results. I ran that man's face through image search and found his obituary. Gregory Morrison died 18 months ago, survived by 2 children who were currently in litigation over his estate. My blood ran cold. 2 wealthy older men, both dead, both with Vanessa in their lives before they died, both leaving behind complicated estate situations. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. I called Howard Brennan again. It was nearly midnight, but this couldn't wait. "Howard, I need you to file an emergency petition with the probate court. I want Dad's assets frozen. No one accesses anything until we sort out whether Vanessa Hartley has any legitimate claim." "On what grounds?" "Suspected fraud, potential undue influence." "Howard, I think this woman is a con artist who targets wealthy older men. I found evidence of at least one prior case with similar circumstances. I need time to investigate before any assets are distributed. That is going to be complicated if she challenges it. Let her challenge it. I want everything on the record. I want a full accounting of every financial transaction my father made in the last 3 years. Every bank statement, every credit card charge, every check written. If she was scamming him, there will be evidence. I'll file first thing Monday morning." I hung up and stared at my laptop screen, at the cached Instagram photo of Vanessa with Gregory Morrison, at my father's obituary pulled up in another window. "I am going to destroy you," I said to Vanessa's photo. "I am going to find out exactly what you did, and I am going to take everything from you." Monday morning, Howard filed the emergency petition. By Monday afternoon, I'd received a response from Vanessa's attorney. Her lawyer's name was Mitchell Grant, mid-tier firm, respectable but not top-tier. The letter was exactly what I expected. Vanessa Hartley was claiming to be Dr. Robert Hartwell's common-law spouse and domestic partner. She was entitled to a portion of his estate under partnership laws. She was requesting immediate access to the house where she'd been living, return of her personal property, and a fair distribution of assets. The letter also mentioned that Vanessa had been providing care and companionship to my father during the last years of his life, and that compensation for those services should be considered in estate distribution. I called Howard. "They're claiming she was his common-law wife. Is that even possible in New York?" "New York doesn't recognize common-law marriage, but she could claim a palimony-type situation, that they had an agreement. She provided services. She is entitled to compensation. It is weak, but it is a strategy. Then we fight it. Howard, I need to hire a private investigator, the best one you know. I need a complete background check on Vanessa Hartley. Every place she has lived, every person she has been involved with, every legal issue she has ever had. I need her entire life documented. I know someone, retired FBI agent, now does private investigation for estate cases. His name is Robert Chen. Get me a meeting with him, today if possible." I met Robert Chen at a coffee shop in Manhattan at 4 o'clock that afternoon. He was in his early 60s, graying hair, sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything about me in seconds. "Howard says you need a deep background investigation on a woman who I believe is a professional con artist targeting wealthy older men." I slid a folder across the table. "Everything I've found so far. I need more. I need proof that she has done this before. I need to know if my father's death was suspicious. I need enough evidence to bury her in court." Robert opened the folder, scanning the contents. The cached social media posts, the prior arrests, the civil lawsuits, my father's financial records showing substantial withdrawals in the months before his death. "This is good preliminary work," he said. "You could have been an investigator." "I am a corporate attorney. Due diligence is my specialty." He nodded approvingly. "What is your timeline?" She filed her claim against the estate. "Probate court has scheduled a hearing in 6 weeks to determine if her claim has merit. I need everything you can find before then." 6 weeks is tight but doable. My retainer is $10,000 plus expenses. Depending on how deep this goes, expenses could run another 10 to 15. Done. I pulled out my checkbook. Whatever it costs. I want the truth. We spent the next hour going through what I knew and what I suspected. Robert took detailed notes, asked pointed questions, identified gaps in my knowledge that needed filling. "The key is going to be establishing pattern," he said. If she has done this before, and based on what you are showing me, she has, we need to document every instance, every victim, every scam, build an irrefutable pattern of behavior that shows this wasn't a legitimate relationship, but a calculated con. What about my father's death? Can we request an autopsy? Has he been buried? Yes, 2 days ago. Then we'd need to petition for exhumation, which requires substantial cause. A judge has to believe there is legitimate reason to suspect foul play. Do you have any? I hesitated. Not yet. Just coincidence and suspicion, not enough. But let me look into the circumstances of his death. If there is anything unusual, we'll pursue it. Over the next 6 weeks, Robert Chen earned every penny of his fee. He found 4 prior victims, 4 wealthy older men who'd been involved with Vanessa Hartley in the past decade. Gregory Morrison, the man from the Instagram post, died 18 months ago. Vanessa had been living with him. His children were currently in litigation because Morrison had changed his will 3 months before his death to leave Vanessa $800,000. The children claimed undue influence. The case was ongoing. Before Morrison, there was James Whitmore, retired executive, widower, dated Vanessa for 2 years, wrote her checks totaling $300,000 for various investments and business opportunities. When he tried to end the relationship, she sued him for breach of promise and emotional distress. They settled. She got $150,000 to go away. Before Whitmore, Carl Hendricks, real estate developer, gave Vanessa power of attorney during a brief illness. She used it to transfer $200,000 from his accounts to hers. By the time he recovered and realized what happened, she'd disappeared. He filed charges, but prosecutors declined to pursue because he'd given her the power of attorney voluntarily. And before Hendricks, there was David Rosen. He didn't die, didn't get scammed out of money, but he did file a restraining order after Vanessa became increasingly unstable and threatening when he refused to marry her after 6 months of dating. 4 men, approximately $1.5 million extracted over 10 years. A pattern of targeting wealthy, recently widowed or divorced men, moving in quickly, isolating them from family, extracting money through various means. Then moving on to the next target, my father was next in line. Robert also uncovered the financial trail. In the 18 months Vanessa had been living with my father, there were significant changes to his spending patterns. $50,000 transferred from his savings to an account in Vanessa's name. His explanation on the transfer memo: investment in VH Consulting, Vanessa's initials. No such business existed in New York business registrations. $75,000 in credit card charges that were inconsistent with my father's normal spending. Jewelry, designer clothing, expensive furniture, all purchased during the time Vanessa was living with him. A $40,000 car lease in Vanessa's name co-signed by my father. Monthly consulting fees of $5,000 being paid from my father's business account to VH Consulting LLC, a shell company registered to Vanessa's address. Over 18 months, Vanessa had extracted approximately $250,000 from my father, and she'd been positioning for more. Robert found draft documents in my father's computer files, documents my father had apparently started but never completed. A revised will leaving Vanessa $500,000. A quitclaim deed transferring partial ownership of the house to her, a joint account application. None of these documents had been finalized or executed, but they existed, which meant my father had been considering them. The question is whether he was doing this voluntarily or under duress, Robert said during one of our update meetings. From what I am finding, Vanessa was skilled at manipulation. She didn't forge documents or overtly steal. She convinced men to give her things willingly. That is harder to prosecute. But the pattern shows intent. She wasn't in these relationships for love, she was in them for money. Agreed. But proving that in court means proving she never cared about your father, that the entire relationship was fraudulent from the start. That is going to require witnesses, evidence of her duplicity, maybe even proof she was seeing other men simultaneously. That is when Robert found something explosive. During the time Vanessa was living with my father, she'd also been maintaining a relationship with another man, a wealthy hedge fund manager named Thomas Ashford. Robert had followed Vanessa's digital trail, social media, email metadata, cell phone location data that was available through legal discovery. 2 days a week, on average, Vanessa's phone pinged at locations near Thomas Ashford's apartment in Manhattan. Robert interviewed Ashford under the pretense of a background check for a different matter. Ashford admitted he'd been dating Vanessa for the past year, had no idea she was living with someone else. Thought he was her only relationship. She told me she worked in consulting and traveled frequently for work, Ashford said when Robert recorded the interview. That is why she couldn't see me every day. But when she was here, she was fully present, affectionate, loving. I was planning to propose next month. Robert also found that Vanessa had been receiving money from Ashford, loans for her consulting business, $30,000 over the course of the year. So while living with my father and extracting money from him, Vanessa was simultaneously running the same con on Thomas Ashford. We had our pattern, we had our evidence, we had everything we needed. I called a meeting with Vanessa's attorney, Mitchell Grant, suggested we discuss settlement before the probate hearing. We met at his office, a standard mid-rise in Midtown, decent but unimpressive. Mitchell was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, wearing a suit that was just slightly too big. Miss Hartwell, thank you for agreeing to meet. I am interested in resolving this quickly, I said. Litigation is expensive and time-consuming. If your client has a legitimate claim, I am willing to discuss reasonable compensation. Vanessa was there too, sitting next to her attorney. She dressed more conservatively than at the funeral, black pantsuit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back, playing the grieving widow. I appreciate your willingness to negotiate, Mitchell said. My client has been very distressed by the adversarial nature of these proceedings. She loved Dr. Hartwell deeply and only wants what is fair. Then, let's talk about what is fair. I pulled out a folder, not the full investigation, just enough to make my point. I've done some research into Miss Hartley's background. I found some concerning patterns. I slid the first document across the table. Gregory Morrison died 18 months ago. Miss Hartley was living with him at the time. His children are currently suing to overturn the will because Morrison changed it to benefit Miss Hartley shortly before his death. The children claim undue influence. Vanessa's expression didn't change, but her attorney shifted uncomfortably. James Whitmore, Miss Hartley received over $300,000 from him for supposed business investments. She later sued him for an additional $150,000 in a settlement that looks a lot like extortion. Another document across the table. Carl Hendricks, Miss Hartley used power of attorney to transfer $200,000 from his accounts while he was ill. He tried to press charges, but the dad declined to prosecute. Mitchell was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Miss Hartwell, did you know about these prior relationships? Vanessa's voice was cool, controlled. I've had relationships with other men, yes. I am not on trial for having a romantic history. You are not on trial yet, I corrected. But you will be if you pursue this claim, because I have evidence of a pattern. 4 wealthy older men. All of them gave you substantial amounts of money. All of them had complicated estate situations after the relationships ended. And now, my father, the same demographic, the same pattern. I pulled out the most damaging document. Thomas Ashford, hedge fund manager, currently lives in Manhattan. Do you know him, Miss Hartley? For the first time, Vanessa's composure cracked. Just slightly, a flicker of panic in her eyes. While you were living with my father, claiming to be his devoted partner, you were simultaneously conducting a relationship with Mr. Ashford. He has given a recorded statement saying he thought you two were exclusive, that he was planning to propose. He had no idea you were living with another man. I leaned forward. So here is what I think happened. You targeted my father, moved in quickly, isolated him from his family, started extracting money through investments and business opportunities. You were positioning to get more. There are draft documents suggesting my father was considering leaving you money, but he died before you could seal the deal. So now you are trying to claim common law marriage, claiming you were his partner, hoping to extract a settlement from the estate. Mitchell looked at his client. Vanessa, is this true? Were you seeing someone else while living with Dr. Hartwell? That is none of anyone's business. It absolutely is our business, I said. Because if you were conducting simultaneous relationships with multiple men for financial gain, that speaks directly to whether your relationship with my father was genuine. It is evidence of fraud. I stood up. Here is my offer. You withdraw your claim against the estate. You vacate my father's house within 7 days. You return any items of value you took that belong to him. In exchange, I won't file criminal fraud charges. I won't pursue civil action for the money you extracted from him. I won't share this information with Thomas Ashford or the Morrison family attorneys who are currently fighting your claim in their case. You can't prove any of this, Vanessa said, but her voice lacked conviction. I have financial records, witness statements, cell phone location data state. I have 4 prior victims willing to testify to your pattern of behavior. I have Thomas Ashford's recorded statement, and I have 6 weeks before the probate hearing to find more. I looked directly at her. I am a corporate attorney, Miss Hartley. I dismantle fraudulent companies for a living. You are not a company. You are just a con artist who got sloppy. This is going to be easy. Mitchell cleared his throat. Could you give us a moment to confer? Take your time. I stepped out of the conference room and called Robert Chen. How confident are you in the evidence? Rock solid. The pattern is irrefutable. If this goes to court, she loses. Good, because I think she is about to fold. 10 minutes later, Mitchell called me back in. My client is willing to withdraw her claim, he said carefully. But she has some conditions. No conditions. Clean withdrawal. She gets nothing. She needs time to find new housing. 7 days. I am being generous. She has personal property in the house that belongs to her. She can take her clothes and personal items. Anything of value that belonged to my father stays. I have photos of what was in that house before she moved in. I'll know if anything's missing. Mitchell looked at Vanessa. She sat rigid, jaw clenched, hatred burning in her eyes as she stared at me. Fine, she spat. I'll withdraw the claim in writing, notarized by end of business today. And Miss Hartley, I leaned forward. If you ever contact anyone in my family again, me, my brother, my mother, I will file every criminal and civil charge I can think of. I will make sure everyone in your world knows exactly what you are. Thomas Ashford will learn the truth. The Morrison family will get all my evidence for their case. Every future mark you target will get a folder of documentation showing your pattern. Do you understand? She understood. I could see it in her face. The withdrawal was filed that afternoon. Vanessa moved out of my father's house within 5 days. I had the locks changed anyway, but I wasn't done. Vanessa might have withdrawn her claim, but I still didn't have answers about my father's death. The timing was too convenient. The circumstances too suspicious. I called Robert Chen. I want to pursue the suspicious death angle. What do we need? Convince a judge there is probable cause to suspect foul play. Show that the circumstances warrant further investigation. What kind of circumstances? Unexplained symptoms before death, financial motive, pattern of similar deaths around the suspect, access to means, opportunity. I spent the next week reconstructing my father's final months. I interviewed his colleagues at the hospital, his golf partners, his neighbors, anyone who'd seen him regularly. What I found was troubling. My father's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, mentioned that she'd noticed Dad seeming not himself in the months before his death. He seemed tired all the time. Complained of not feeling well. I suggested he see a doctor, but he said Vanessa was taking care of him. His golf partner, Jim Reynolds, said something similar. Rob started canceling our weekly games. Said he was feeling run down, didn't have the energy. That wasn't like him. He loved golf. His colleague, Dr. Sarah Martinez, mentioned she'd seen my father at the hospital cafeteria about 2 months before he died. He looked pale. I asked if he was okay, and he mentioned having some digestive issues. I suggested he get checked out, but he seemed reluctant. All of this was happening while Vanessa was living with him. While she was taking care of him, I obtained my father's medical records as his executor. I had legal right to them. His last physical had been 6 weeks before his death, and everything had looked normal. Heart was strong, cholesterol slightly elevated but managed with medication. Blood pressure good, no red flags, but the symptoms his friends described: fatigue, digestive issues, general unwellness. Those started after the physical, after he'd gotten a clean bill of health. I called Robert. I think she was poisoning him. That is a serious accusation. What is your evidence? The timeline. He was healthy at his physical. Then he started having symptoms: fatigue, digestive problems, feeling run down. These symptoms started after Vanessa moved in and continued until he died. His friends noticed. His colleagues noticed. but apparently my father attributed it to stress or aging. What kind of poison? I don't know. That is what an autopsy would tell us. Robert was quiet for a moment. There are substances that can cause heart attacks, especially in someone with pre-existing minor heart conditions. Some are nearly undetectable, unless you are specifically looking for them. Can we petition for exhumation? We'd need more than suspicion. We'd need concrete evidence suggesting poisoning. A judge won't authorize exhumation lightly. It is traumatic for families, expensive, and often inconclusive. What if we can prove she had access to such substances? That is when I had an idea. Vanessa had moved out of my father's house. But before she left, I'd had the house swept by a forensics team, ostensibly to document the state of the property, but really to preserve any evidence. Robert, the forensics team took samples from the house, right? From the kitchen, the bathroom. Yes, standard protocol. Can we have those samples analyzed, check for any unusual substances? We can. But it is expensive, and we'd need to know what we're looking for. Check for everything. Common poisons, substances that could cause heart problems, anything that doesn't belong in a normal household. The analysis took 2 weeks and cost $15,000. Worth every penny, the lab found traces of colchicine in samples from the kitchen, specifically in the sugar bowl and in residue from a coffee mug. Colchicine is a medication used to treat gout. In small doses, it is therapeutic. In larger doses or when administered over time without medical supervision, it is toxic. Symptoms include nausea, fatigue, digestive problems, and in susceptible individuals it can cause heart problems. My father didn't have gout, had no prescription for colchicine, shouldn't have had any in his house, but Vanessa might have. Colchicine is sometimes used in veterinary medicine. It is also available through online pharmacies in countries with less stringent regulations. I called Robert. We have physical evidence of poison in Dad's house. Is that enough for exhumation? It is enough to petition. Whether a judge grants it depends on how we present the case. We filed an emergency petition with the court, included the forensics report, the timeline of my father's declining health, the pattern of Vanessa's prior relationships. The financial moat of my father was worth $3.8 million, and she'd been positioning to inherit. The judge scheduled a hearing. Vanessa's attorney, Mitchell Grant, filed opposition, claimed the petition was vindictive, that I was harassing his client, that the colchicine could have been in the house for innocent reasons. What innocent reason? I demanded during the hearing. My father didn't have gout, didn't have any prescription for colchicine, and the forensics team found it in his sugar bowl, in the container he used daily for his coffee. How is that innocent? The judge looked at Mitchell. Does your client have an explanation for how colchicine ended up in Dr. Hartwell's sugar bowl? Mitchell fumbled. My client didn't live in that house. She moved out weeks ago. She has no knowledge of any substances in the house. Your client lived there for 18 months, I countered. She had full access to the kitchen, to his food, to everything he consumed, and during that time my father went from healthy to dead in 6 months. His friends and colleagues documented a decline that began after she moved in. This isn't vindictive. This is a legitimate investigation into suspicious circumstances. The judge granted the exhumation order. Exhuming a body is not like it looks in movies. It is clinical, procedural, and deeply traumatic, even when you believe it is necessary. Marcus and I were present, though we stayed far back, watched as workers carefully unearthed my father's casket, watched as it was transported to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy took 3 days. The medical examiner was thorough, testing for every substance we'd flagged, examining tissue samples, reconstructing cause of death. The report came back on a Friday afternoon. Dr. Hartwell's death was caused by acute cardiac arrest, the medical examiner explained during a meeting in her office. However, toxicology reveals elevated levels of colchicine in his system, levels consistent with chronic exposure over a period of weeks or months. Chronic exposure, I repeated, meaning he was poisoned over time. That is the most likely explanation. Colchicine in therapeutic doses is relatively safe, but exposure to small amounts regularly, particularly in someone with pre-existing minor heart conditions, can cause cumulative damage, eventually leading to cardiac arrest. Is this definitive? Robert Chen asked. Could there be another explanation? There is always the possibility of unknown medical factors, but combined with the presence of colchicine in his home environment, in his sugar bowl, no less, and the documented timeline of declining health, this looks like deliberate poisoning. The medical examiner ruled the death suspicious pending investigation. That gave the district attorney grounds to open a criminal investigation. Within a week, Vanessa Hartley was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The arrest happened at her new apartment, a luxury rental in Manhattan, paid for with money she'd extracted from Thomas Ashford. Detectives arrived with a warrant. She was arraigned the next day. Her bail was set at $1 million. She couldn't make it. Mitchell Grant argued for reduction, but the prosecutor, an intense woman named Diana Reeves, argued successfully that Vanessa was a flight risk with pattern of targeting wealthy men across multiple states. Vanessa was remanded to jail pending trial. The media went insane. Con artist accused of murdering doctor for inheritance. Black widow preyed on wealthy men. Headlines everywhere. The story had everything. Money, murder, deception, a pattern of victims. I didn't give interviews, didn't want to be part of the circus, but I provided everything I'd found to Diana Reeves. The pattern of prior victims, the financial records, the forensics, Thomas Ashford's statement, everything. Diana built a devastating case. At the preliminary hearing, she laid out the timeline. Vanessa meeting my father 2.5 years ago. The relationship accelerating quickly. Her moving in after just 6 months. The financial extraction beginning immediately. Draft documents showing my father had been considering leaving her money, but those documents stalling. My father, despite being under her influence, apparently having enough hesitation that he never finalized them. And then the symptoms starting. Fatigue, digestive issues, general unwellness, all consistent with chronic colchicine poisoning. Diana brought in an expert witness, a toxicologist from Johns Hopkins. He testified that the levels of colchicine found in my father's system were consistent with regular exposure over time, that the most likely delivery method was through food or beverages, that the presence of colchicine in the sugar bowl, a container my father used daily for his coffee, suggested deliberate contamination. Is there any innocent explanation for how colchicine ended up in Dr. Hartwell's sugar bowl? Diana asked. None that I can think of, the expert replied. Colchicine isn't a common household substance. It has no legitimate purpose in a sugar bowl. The only explanation that fits the evidence is that someone put it there deliberately intending for Dr. Hartwell to consume it. The defense tried to argue that I had contaminated the scene, that the colchicine could have been introduced after Vanessa moved out, that the forensics were questionable. But the timeline didn't support that. The forensics team had swept the house within days of Vanessa moving out, and my father's symptoms had been documented by multiple witnesses for months before his death symptoms that stopped making sense unless you understood he was being poisoned. The judge found sufficient probable cause to proceed to trial. Over the next 6 months, as the case moved through the criminal justice system, more victims came forward. A man in Boston who'd dated Vanessa 3 years ago. She'd convinced him to invest $50,000 in a startup that never existed. A widower in Philadelphia who'd written checks to Vanessa for consulting services that were never performed. He'd lost $80,000 before his daughter intervened. A retired teacher in Connecticut who'd given Vanessa power of attorney during a hospital stay. Vanessa had used it to withdraw $30,000 from his savings. The pattern was irrefutable. Over 15 years, Vanessa had targeted at least 8 men, extracted over $2 million total, and left destruction in her wake. But my father was the only one who died. The trial began in October, nearly a year after my father's death. I attended every day, Saturday in the gallery with Marcus, watching Diana Reeves methodically dismantle any defense Vanessa's attorneys tried to mount. They tried to argue that my father's death was natural, that the colchicine levels weren't high enough to be definitively fatal, that the presence of colchicine in the house was coincidental. Diana destroyed each argument. She brought in my father's friends and colleagues, who testified to his declining health after Vanessa moved in. She brought in financial experts who showed the systematic extraction of money. She brought in the toxicologist who explained exactly how chronic colchicine poisoning works. And she brought in Thomas Ashford, who testified that Vanessa had been conducting a parallel relationship with him while living with my father, that she'd been extracting money from him too, that she'd never mentioned living with another man. "Did you know Robert Hartwell existed?" Diana asked. "No," Thomas said, looking directly at Vanessa. "She told me she lived alone, that she was building a consulting business. I had no idea she was living with someone else." The most damning testimony came from Gregory Morrison's daughter. Morrison was the man who died 18 months before my father, the one whose estate was still in litigation. His daughter, Sarah Morrison, took the stand and described a pattern that was eerily identical to my father's case. Vanessa had met her father at a charity event. They'd started dating within months. She'd moved in. Money started disappearing. Investments, loans, business opportunities. Her father had started seeming unwell, tired, weak, digestive problems, and then he died of a heart attack. "We didn't suspect anything at the time," Sarah testified, tears streaming down her face. "We thought it was natural. He was 71, had some heart issues. But now, hearing about Dr. Hartwell, seeing the pattern, I think she killed my father too." The jury was riveted. Diana's closing argument was powerful. She'd stood before the jury and laid out the entire pattern, the targeting of wealthy older men, the rapid escalation of relationships, the financial extraction, the draft documents positioning for inheritance, and then the deaths. "Vanessa Hartley is a predator," Diana said. "She targets vulnerable men, recently widowed or divorced, lonely, trusting. She moves in quickly before their families can intervene. She extracts money through manipulation and deception, and when she can't get enough through manipulation, she resorts to murder." She pointed at Vanessa, who sat impassive at the defense table. Robert Hartwell was a good man, a respected cardiologist who spent 40 years saving lives. He deserved to enjoy his retirement, to spend time with his children and future grandchildren, to travel and pursue hobbies and simply live. Instead, he met Vanessa Hartley, and within 2 years he was dead, poisoned slowly over months with colchicine that was deliberately placed in his sugar bowl. Murdered for an estate he hadn't even left her yet, but that she was confident she could claim. The defense wants you to believe this was a tragic accident, that the colchicine appeared magically in Dr. Hartwell's home, that his declining health was coincidental, that the pattern of prior victims is irrelevant. But you know better. You've seen the evidence. You've heard the testimony. You know exactly what Vanessa Hartley is and what she did. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. "On the count of second-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty." Vanessa's face crumpled. She'd maintained composure throughout the trial, but now she broke, started sobbing. Her attorneys tried to comfort her. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just a hollow sort of completion. Marcus grabbed my hand. "It is over. It is over." I agreed. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later. The prosecution recommended the maximum 25 years to life. At the sentencing hearing, I gave a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium looking directly at Vanessa for the first time since the trial began. "My father was a good man," I began. "Not perfect, no one is, but good, kind, dedicated. He spent his life healing people, saving lives, making a difference. You took that from him. You targeted him because he was lonely after his divorce, because he was trusting, because he had money you wanted. You moved into his life and his home. You isolated him from his family. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, I see how you did it, suggesting we were too busy to visit, monopolizing his time, creating distance between him and the people who loved him. And then you poisoned him, slowly, deliberately. You put colchicine in his sugar bowl knowing he used it every day for his coffee. You watched him get weaker, sicker, more dependent on you. And when he finally died, you showed up at his funeral acting like the grieving widow, sitting in the front row like you belonged there. I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. But here is what you didn't understand. My father raised me to be strong, to be thorough, to question things that don't add up. He taught me to look deeper, to investigate, to not accept surface explanations. So when you showed up claiming to be his partner, this woman none of us had ever heard of, I didn't just accept it, I investigated. I dug. I found your pattern of victims. I found the forensics evidence. I built the case that put you here. You thought you could kill my father and take his money. Instead, you are going to prison. And every day you spend there, I want you to remember you didn't just kill a lonely old man. You killed someone's father, someone's friend, someone's mentor, a man who mattered. And he mattered enough that his daughter made sure you faced justice. I sat down. The judge looked at Vanessa. "Miss Hartley, do you have anything to say?" Vanessa stood. She looked smaller than she had at the funeral. Prison had stripped away the polish, the designer clothes, the carefully constructed image. "I loved Robert," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know you don't believe that. I know the evidence makes me look like a monster, but I did love him, and I never meant to hurt him. It was a lie." Everyone in the courtroom knew it was a lie. The judge wasn't swayed. "Miss Hartley, I've reviewed the evidence in this case. I've heard the testimony. I've seen the pattern of your behavior over 15 years. You are a predator who targeted vulnerable men for financial gain, and when manipulation wasn't enough, you resorted to murder. The court sentences you to 25 years to life in prison. You'll be eligible for parole after 25 years, at which point you'll be in your 70s. Perhaps by then you'll have developed the capacity for genuine remorse." Vanessa was led away in handcuffs. I watched her go and felt nothing. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. I gave a brief statement. "Justice has been served today. My father's killer will spend the rest of her life in prison. That won't bring him back, but it ensures she can never hurt anyone else. Thank you." Marcus and I went to my father's grave that afternoon, stood there in the cold November air, looking at the headstone. "He'd be proud of you," Marcus said. "The way you fought for him. I just did what needed to be done. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have accepted Vanessa's claim, maybe settled, moved on. You didn't. You made sure Dad got justice. I placed flowers on the grave. He deserved it. He deserved to have someone fight for him the way he always fought for us." The conviction had ripple effects beyond just Vanessa. The Morrison family, who'd been fighting Vanessa's claim on Gregory Morrison's estate, used our evidence to strengthen their case. The civil court reviewed the criminal trial testimony and ruled in favor of the family. Vanessa's $800,000 inheritance was revoked. The money went to Morrison's children where it should have gone all along. Thomas Ashford got his money back. The $30,000 Vanessa had borrowed was recovered from her accounts before they were frozen. The other victims I'd identified began pursuing civil claims. Several successfully recovered money Vanessa had taken from them, and law enforcement in 3 other states opened investigations into Vanessa's activities. There was talk of additional charges, fraud, theft, possible conspiracy charges if they could prove she'd had accomplices. Vanessa Hartley, the sophisticated con artist who'd spent 15 years operating with impunity, was finally facing consequences for every crime she'd committed. My father's estate was settled. Marcus and I split everything as the will intended, $3.8 million divided equally. Neither of us needed the money. We were both successful in our own careers, but it represented something important. Our father's legacy, proof that Vanessa hadn't won. I used part of my inheritance to establish a fund in my father's name, a scholarship for medical students from modest backgrounds. The kind of student my father had been 50 years ago. It felt right, a way to honor his memory by helping future doctors, and I wrote a detailed account of the entire case, not for publication, but for law enforcement and estate attorneys, a guide for recognizing patterns of elder fraud, warning signs to watch for, investigative techniques that had proven effective. If my experience could help other families protect their loved ones, it was worth documenting. It has been 3 years since my father's death, 3 years since Vanessa walked into his funeral and tried to claim she was the love of his life. She is in prison now. Maximum security facility upstate. She has appealed her conviction twice. Both appeals were denied. She'll likely die in prison. I don't think about her often anymore. When I do, I don't feel anger or satisfaction, just a sort of clinical detachment. She was a problem. I solved it. That is all. My relationship with Marcus grew stronger through all of this. Shared trauma either breaks families or bonds them. We bonded. He and his wife had a daughter last year, my first niece. They named her Rebecca, after our paternal grandmother. I think about how my father would have loved being a grandfather, how Vanessa stole that from him, from us. But I also think about how he raised me to be the kind of person who wouldn't let injustice stand, who would investigate, who would fight, who would see a problem and fix it methodically and thoroughly. In a strange way, Vanessa picked the wrong mark. Not because my father was different from her other victims, he was exactly her type. Wealthy, lonely, trusting. But because his daughter was someone who would notice discrepancies, ask questions, dig deeper. She gambled that family members would be too grief-stricken or too polite to investigate, that they'd accept her claims and settle to avoid conflict. She gambled wrong. Here is what I learned from all of this. Evil counts on good people being too nice to fight back. Predators rely on their victims' families being too concerned with propriety to make waves. Con artists depend on shame and embarrassment keeping people silent. My father's story could have ended differently. Vanessa could have gotten away with it, claimed part of his estate, moved on to the next victim, continued her pattern indefinitely. But she didn't, because I refused to let her. If you ever find yourself in a situation where something doesn't add up, where someone's claims don't match the evidence, where your instincts tell you something is wrong, trust those instincts. Investigate. Dig deeper. Be thorough. Don't let politeness or fear of conflict stop you from finding the truth. So that is my story. The time my father's mistress tried to steal his estate, and I destroyed her instead. If this resonated with you, absolutely demolish that like button. Subscribe for more stories where predators face justice and families fight back. And drop a comment. Have you ever encountered an obvious con artist? Did you call them out or did you let it go? I want to hear your stories. Thanks for watching this entire case unfold, and remember, your loved ones deserve advocates who won't back down. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is refuse to let them be victimized, even after they're gone. I'll see you in the next one.